I'm Drew Whitworth. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Education. My field of study is workplace learning and information behaviour, and the project that I'm talking about was a project on which we used visualisation techniques to try and get communities of people in, well, one community in a workplace and one community in a housing cooperative to visualise the information and the learning resources that they had available to them. The, if you like, original nature of this study comes about partly because a lot of the studies that have been done on how people use information to learn have been done with individuals, and largely in the past they were done in settings in which you would be assigned an information task. It's something like, retrieve this paper or find something that you need for your studies. And the process of your work through that task would be monitored, and at the end you'd give some feedback on what kind of criteria you used to select the resources that you used in your learning process. But in terms of the studies of workplace learning that we did, there were some deficiencies that we thought with this. One is that when you're a member of a community of practice in a workplace or in something like a housing cooperative, you need to have some sense of how your colleagues are working. You need to have some sense of what they think is important and what sources of information they use. And the sort of things like barriers can emerge, and these barriers in the path of you finding this information can be to do with the social relationships within your team of people. It might be that one particular person is seen as the valuable source of information about a particular skill or source of expertise that they have, and that's fine. But it might be perhaps that you just get into a habit or a routine. You get into a situation where you always go to the same person, or you always go to the same website, or you always pick up the same technological tool. And what we wanted to try and do in terms of making these communities more effective spaces for learning was to try and give people a sense of the alternatives that exist, and to take them through a process of self-reflection and a process of group discussion and work with them as a facilitator. If you like, we think only after the project is completed, but we were thinking of calling this information counselling, sort of getting people a sense of what the important sources of information are for them at a particular time. In order to do this, we've been making use of Ketso, which is a kind of hands-on visual concept mapping tool that was developed also at the University of Manchester by Joanne Tippett and others. We worked with two groups, one who were based in the university and one who, as I said, were based in a housing cooperative, actually in Hebden Bridge in Yorkshire. And both of these groups had particular problems that they needed to address. The housing cooperative wanted to organise an event for the local arts festival, and the workplace group had to sort out their teaching for the following year. And we got them to focus over a series of sessions that progressed through the summer of 2012, working with them to use this concept mapping tool, not to solve the problem directly, but to get them to visualise the sources of information they needed to solve the problem, where they could get the information from, how they would validate the information, what they needed to communicate, and what barriers might exist in the path of this. And this had two benefits, if you like, one for us and one for them. The benefits for them was that working with a facilitator and this concept mapping tool and being able to do it over a period of time was helping them see how the problem space was developing, and it enabled us to help them see where there were certain barriers. The housing co-op, for instance, at one point were having real problems moving forward, and we were able to help them see that it was down to one particular problem that was, if you like, holding up everything else, but they hadn't really realised that that problem was holding up their work. We also helped them see that in a lot of ways they were deferring to one particular member of the community when they were looking at the ways in which they solved their problems. So, if that particular member of the community wasn't quite so engaged for whatever reason, again, they were having problems making decisions. And it was also interesting to compare the two groups, because we could see that the housing cooperative, were very much looking inward for all of their information needs. They were treating each other as the main sources of information, whereas the workplace group at the university were much more prepared to look outside. Now, that doesn't mean that one of them was doing it in a better way than the other, but it was a difference between them that might help explain why, for instance, the housing cooperative were finding it difficult to move forward in certain ways because they needed fresh inputs. And the final sort of benefit for us was that these concept maps, the Ketso maps, were all good sources of data. You could get lots of different kinds of data from them. You could get quantitative data in terms of how many concepts were on the map and how many were on different parts of the map, because different parts of the map were intended to represent different stages in the information gathering process. So some cases you might have, there were a lot of barriers coming up. In the next session there might be fewer barriers, and you could see that change over time. You could get longitudinal data, you could see how the problem was developing over time, and you could make certain predictions about what they would find awkward or difficult. And you could get qualitative data as well. You could look at what was actually written on the map and look at the ways different people, different members of the community highlighted different problems. So you could also get a sense of how many people were actively contributing to the definition of the problem and its resolution, or were there members of the group who were hanging back and being passive and staying in the background and not saying anything. So all in all, it was a very interesting way in which to find out and to get a picture and a snapshot, but also almost like a slow motion movie of how these people were taking decisions within an environment of information and resources that included each other, and getting a sense of how they took decisions as a group.